I'm going to have to yell then, aren't I? That's all right.
Just like in church, I'll hold my hand up when I can't hear.
You do? I have an issue
like
with
this.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me here today to speak again with my friends and my former colleagues. It was in 2010 that I formally left teaching secondary education on speech education, but I've still been advising and actually doing a little coaching every once in a while, now and then, and that has kept me abreast of issues that face Kentucky speech and even national speech. Believe me, this old speech coach and old speech educator is flattered that you believe that I have something to add to this discourse on speech education in Kentucky. When Steve told me the title of your conference, Speak, A New Hope, he suggested that it might coincide with the name of the original Star Wars film, A New Hope. This is an effective theme because if we have a new hope, that implies that there is an old hope, and a hope that is going on presently, and our responsibility to ensure a hope for the future. Now, when I think of old hope, I think of Bob Hope, a comedian and an actor of yesteryear who golfed quite a bit and entertained the troops. Hope said, "When we recall the past, we usually find that it is the simplest things, not great occasions, that in retrospect give the greatest glow of happiness." And so when we delve into the past of Kentucky forensics and speech education, from my perspective, it is marked with more simplicity than how it has evolved. And it is in that simplicity that lessons are to be learned. You may not realize it, speech education was alive and well in the mid-1800s in Kentucky. My first example is the blab schools. These public schools were called blab because students would be asked to stand up and recite information that other students had given to them. Incidentally, Abraham Lincoln was one of those blab school students. He, of course, turned blabbing into refined rhetorical skills that he used in his political career. Besides the blab schools, Kentucky public schools in the 1800s incorporated the McGuffey Readers to hone public speaking skills. The McGuffey Reader 5th edition includes 32 pages dedicated to elocution. That includes articulation, oral reading, and public speaking. Most contest speaking in the 1800s and early 1900s in Kentucky was left up to civic organizations to provide contests. The American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and 4-H often conducted contests. The Murray Women's Club sponsored a declamation contest for the students in the Murray community in the early 1920s. At Murray High School, in the trophy case, there's a beautiful silver loving cup engraved with declamation and the years 1927 and 1928 engraved upon it. In the early 1900s, many people took elocution lessons in the homes because the classes were not offered. Perhaps one of the best examples of these specialists is former, or I guess not former, but Kissel Hall of Fame member Miss Bess Williams. She was not employed by the Harrodsburg school system as a teacher, but was a coach of the team made up of individuals that she taught lessons to in her home. One of her students described her as meticulous and demanding in getting the very best from the students. Miss Beth's students were Kissel debate state champions. She traveled extensively on the national circuit in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. A particular story that I enjoyed about Miss Beth was one which she took her students to St. Louis, Missouri for a debate tournament. Now, her students didn't live up to her standards and didn't do particularly well. So Miss Beth went home without her students. And she wanted them, I guess, to get home the best way they could on their own. Despite not having classes, interscholastic debate and speech competition was gearing up as early as the 1910s and 1920s in the state of Kentucky. For we know that the first Kentucky policy debate champion were crowned in 1921 by the Kentucky High School Speech League. Lexington was named the inaugural champ. Kentucky has been blessed by several very talented speech communication professionals that have moved the state from elocution lessons in the home to the classrooms. People like Harlan Ham of the University of Breckinridge School and Morehead State University, and Garland and Ruth Blair of LaRue County, Gladys DeMarcus of Middlesboro, Bess Williams of Harrodsburg, Neville McCracken of Lonoke, and Gifford Blyton of University of Kentucky, and Ruby Kreider of Murray State University. They were definitely a force. And going with today's theme, they are the force. Their guidance is still living on through their students and their students' students. They were the architects of speech education and forensic activity in the state of Kentucky. Since the early 1910s, there were a variety of invitational tournaments. Most interscholastic tournaments involved what we would consider team policy debate. These tournaments often occurred after school and were held at a regional location for about 4 to 6 schools. This format continued until the 1960s. One that I attended was at Lone Oak High School in Paducah, Kentucky, with Murray High, Tillman, Murray College High, Trigg County, Paris, Tennessee, and the host Lone Oak participating. 3 rounds of competition, with the last round being a power-matched round to determine the winner. Also, schools during the 50s and 60s would host practice tournaments for several schools. And often the host school's students would serve as the judges for those other schools. The Saturday tournaments became the only tournament format by the 70s. The Saturday tournament permitted schools from a farther distance to be able to participate. Starting in the 90s, the swing tournament was begun in part as a response to the shift in Kissel rules that permitted pre-qualification to the state tournament. This act also permitted Kissel's interjection into the decision-making process of the way invitationals were run and who could have one and when it could be. The extensive interscholastic forensic competition in the early 1900s led the University of Kentucky through its agricultural extension service to create Kissel in 1921. Kissel's model of service and competition was organized into 10 regional regions across the state. The first league director that I've been able to find in any information, even though he obviously was not the first, was Denver Sloan, who, at least in this Kentucky Kernel article, was league director in 1959. From the early years, the region format in Kissel would hold an educational festival in the fall to help schools with the region to learn about league events and activities, And then a regional tournament festival was held in March to qualify superior ranking students to the state tournament, which was held in April. A student competed in one round, and if he/she received a superior, the student qualified for the state tournament. At state, a student competed in one round and received a medal for superior and excellent ratings. At the regional and state tournament, the only events offered in the early years were policy debate, prose reading, oratory, declamation, and extemporaneous speaking. A strong emphasis on public speaking, as in Lincoln's time. Other events were eventually added. The festival format held to the norm until 1966, when competitions to name individual state champions in oratory and extemporaneous speaking were held. This happened because the NFL permitted state organizations to send their winners to the NFL National Tournament. The first Kissel State Tournament to recognize a team sweepstakes winner, as well as individual event state winners of all the events, was 1972. The festival approached at regionals and state that was indeed more simple was finished. Now, my research about Kissel doesn't give me exact numbers. All I can do is add anecdotal information. When I was a senior in 1971 and participated in the Kissel State Tournament, 102 schools participated. From the information that I was able to gather from last year's Kissel State Tournament, 64 schools participated in the speech and debate tournament. Obviously, the numbers, for some reason, have decreased. Now, after having talked with Steve and Katie, and even information about KESDA, the numbers in those particular organizations, at least for the last 10 years, have been stable, have remained about the same. Since 1990, Kentucky speech programs have been dramatically affected by education reform. CARA did away with specialist degrees needed to teach speech communication and theater. Rather than needing a degree in speech communication to teach speech courses, an English degree was enough. Therefore, universities followed suit and did away with speech communication degrees that could be used in teacher certification because no one was going into those things. Only one university in the state of Kentucky offers a restricted speech certification. That is Thomas More College. This means that the number of educationally trained speech professionals dropped in Kentucky. When speech education courses and certification are cut, the discipline is harmed and has been a limiting factor in finding communication professionals to be a part of this discipline. So, according to the Old Hope, let's simplify our past and see what we can glean from our history. 1. Kentucky schools have had a strong history of involvement in speech, communication, and forensics activity, and one that we can be proud of. 2. The number of schools participating and individual students participating in forensics activities have decreased on the whole, with policy debate leading the way of the decrease. I had to cut part of my speech for time that I talked about debate, but it's a fact. 3. A core group of heavily involved schools is helping to maintain the stable participation and NFL, CFL, and KESDA. 4, more state organizations require more money for involvement. 5, the emphasis in competitive speech events have gradually veered away from speaking events to a heavy emphasis on interpretation events. So now that we've looked at the past, what about the present? Kentucky Forensics have 4 strong organizations: KISL, KESDA, Kentucky NFL, and Kentucky CFL. They are all healthy and have participation from every region of the state. KESDA and Kentucky NFL and Kentucky CFL especially maintain their stability by participation of a core group of schools. KISL, which has seen numbers of schools decrease, has those core schools participating too, but because schools from all over the state participate at various levels, it would seem reasonable that their numbers have fallen. Each of the state organizations hold competitions in multiple events. KESDA holds competition in 14 events. KISL, 17 events. CFL, 10 events. NFL, 10 events. None of these organizations hold a one-act play contest. Forensic activity is expensive. From transportation to participation fees to membership fees to clothing to tournament cost to coaching and supervision costs, the cost of this activity has only increased, whereas dollars from school districts is decreasing. To be fair, school districts have fewer dollars. And so forensics activities as well as speech communication classes are fighting for every dollar as every other fish in the bowl is doing. Having heard from several coaches, at least anecdotally, it seems that coaches and speech teachers are having to spend more and more time fundraising. The pinch of the individual household is also increasing. I know from speaking to the Rowan County Booster Organization that they tell me that they are increasingly having to supplement students for going to tournaments. Kentucky programs continue to participate and excel in state invitationals, state tournaments, national invitationals, and national tournaments. The Kentucky State Education Department includes speech education in the state-mandated program review. Communications, misnamed writing, is 1/3 of the program review. Many schools have begun to include a mandatory speech class in reaction to this change. The Common Core is filled with standards that use communication skills from K through 12. I conducted a professional development for the Rowan County Middle School in which I presented a way to use group discussion for other core classes. And this would help, of course, the faculty to learn about speech communication and how to use it. So after looking at the present state of speech activities, we must turn our attention to the future. A New Hope. And going with the Star Wars theme, I'll quote Obi-Wan Kenobi. This weapon is your life. He, of course, was telling Luke that the force that was in him was the weapon that he had at his disposal to defend himself. I like to think that proficient speaking skills, which is in every person, is the weapon that students can use to forge their future. Our future is good because we have such a strong force undergirding us. But just as the force was weakened at times in Star Wars, So too, the future of speech education and forensic activity has some challenges. So using the weapon of proficient speaking to defend us, let's examine the future challenges of speech education and forensic activity in Kentucky, and perhaps some ideas that we might use to minimize those challenges. What are the challenges to the force in Kentucky speech? 1, diminishing resources. 2, increasingly complex tournament activity and organization support. 3, loss of focus about what our discipline is really about. We don't have any current data to support what we're doing, and we need that. Continued lack of educational support for training speech teachers and forensic coaches. 5, an increasing emphasis on interpretation events while fewer speaking events remain. What can we do to minimize these challenges? First of all, and this is great what we're doing today, speak, yay, okay? We must sit down as a group to strategize about a future, to see where we are and where we need to be, and then create a roadmap to get there. It needs to include examining speech education in the schools, as well as forensic activity. 2, we are in a data-driven world. We must collect data that can help us defend our discipline and help us plot our future. 3, we must encourage universities to provide coursework and training in speech education and forensics. Now, the University of Kentucky, Department of Education, is moving toward classes that will provide a type of educational certification for forensic activity, and that's great. The National Speech and Debate Association has training and accreditation and being recognized as an advanced professional forensic coach, which, by the way, Ryan Ray of Henry Clay has. We also need to make sure that individuals are aware of these possibilities. In the past, Kissel has sponsored workshops about forensic activities. This might be tried again. 4, we don't toot our horns enough. We do a great job. We do a great job. We just don't represent ourselves as we should throughout all media and through the Kentucky Department education process. Any and all things that we need to do should appear in media. We want to build the idea within our communities that speech education is indispensable. I'm not just talking about news releases to newspaper outlets and radio and TV outlets, although that's great. We must, in any way possible, get to the public what we do that is unique, that no other discipline and organization does. We prepare students to think on our feet and create speeches to communicate to a specific audience. No other discipline does that. Our students are taught professional walk the walk and talk the talk. Why not send students to various civic organizations within your community to show what they can do? Many organizations need entertainment for their meetings, and that is something a trained speech student can do. It doesn't hurt to have the women of the Women's Club to think of speech students as those really smart students who dress well and can talk intelligently. No other programs can identify with that. I would absolutely send a representative of the team to perform at the Board of Education meetings. Blow them away with what our students have been taught to do. Once, I had a student to attend a board meeting and perform an impromptu speech. The superintendent, we gave the superintendent a quotation book, and he thumbed through it and pointed to one, and the student looked at the topic, prepped for 30 seconds, and gave a 6-minute speech, speaking flawlessly. Those adults' mouths were wide open with what this person could do. And I know that she's not alone. Every school has those people. Often the board somewhat know of our success, but they don't really understand what we teach our students. And yes, folks, a good storytelling is enjoyable, but it's not as impressive as a student presenting something originally researched, written, prepared, and delivered like extemp, oratory, and impromptu. Having a young person professionally dressed doing something that others cannot do is impressive. Performing in front of civic clubs is a good way to get the organization to contribute to you. It also doesn't hurt for the board members to know what you are doing, so you might get an added voice in the budget wars. We should also be more involved in the Kentucky Education Department arena. I know this is hard because, first of all, we don't have time, and we don't have funds to hire a person to represent it, like KMEA. But it's still a goal that we can strive to do. And number 5, embrace the program review in Common Core. And having talked with my wife, I know that sometimes, not necessarily through speech people, but the program review, sometimes there are people, okay? That's something that we should embrace. In the past, state educational requirements have hurt speech communication. We now have educational reform that embraces it. We should, as speech professionals, embrace it too. Speech communication is specifically used in every area of the program review. That includes communications, not just writing, arts and humanities, and practical living. Don't exclusively see that speech contests be your only contribution to the program review. Be the specialist. The person in your district to help other teachers develop communication skills. Understand, the review is just not writing, but speaking and listening as well. They often don't realize this. You must make your colleagues and administrators aware of this and act upon it. If you don't, who will? Remember, our job is to promote speech education for all students. All students. The program review attempts to do that, and we should be the voice that trumpets that. This should also get you some goodwill from other teachers, and could be a conduit for students becoming members of the speech team. 6, let's think about ways to trim financial excesses. This may need us to be creative and think outside the box. This is where I think our investment in competition may have hurt us. Can we think of a new way to conduct tournaments? Remember, money is tight. Perhaps we could borrow an idea from the past, have some smaller regional tournaments on weekday nights, like the academic team does, and emphasize learning over winning a trophy. I'm not talking about doing away with the weekend tournaments, because they're wonderful and they're great motivators too. But having the other ones could be a way to do speech with less money. This could also attract new schools in the region who are new to our discipline. And it can help them to learn about it in a more non-threatening way. It is difficult to encourage new schools to participate in forensics when there is no money. Also, perhaps simplifying and slimming down the number of our state organizations might save us some money. It is expensive to belong to all four. Could it be time to integrate Kissel and KESTA? Could having one general state organization be just as successful as having two? Why not take from both what is good and emerge with one organization? The simplification of taking two state organizations and putting them into one would undoubtedly save schools money and time. I believe it would also be more attractive because the whole idea of participating would not be as daunting for a new program because there would be fewer things to have to understand and do. 7, you must include more public speaking events. Having to research and write and perform original presentations is the core of speech education. And higher order thinking, which is the hallmark of Common Core and program review. We have a history of an emphasis on public speaking events and need to bring them back for our students in the 21st century. 8, no matter the future of each, Kissel or KESTA, they must be smarter in disseminating information about the organization's activities to schools who have no programs. You must make sure that you are actively courting schools that have no programs, not just hoping that the right person gets the message from an email message to the district. Now, we have looked at the past, present, and future of speech communication and forensic activity. And holding to the topic of this conference, Speak, A New Hope, we know that the words of Yoda, "May the force be with you," will move you forward no matter what the future may be. For the force of Mr. Ham, Garland and Ruth Blair, Miss DeMarcus, Miss McCracken, Miss Bess, Dr. Blyton, and Miss Kreider are deeply embedded within Kentucky speech and education. And they call upon us to face our challenges and together creatively meet the challenges that face us today so to ensure a hope